Okay, so let's talk about two things. First is workflow. Second is file management. Okay, so let's break down what workflow means. So workflow is the process that you use as you approach the editing of your photos and how you process them. What are the typical steps that you go through? How do you approach that? What is your logic in what you decide to edit first and second, and so forth. So order / process for editing or processing your RAW or JPEG photos. Okay. So things to consider with workflow. The easiest way to do it if you're working in Lightroom is to just open up your file. You're going to directly import it to Lightroom so you can get the raw file. And then just work from the top down. Now, if you want to take a different approach, you can, but Lightroom is set up in such a way that if you work top down, it generally works out fine, and it just creates a nice sort of checkbox of, do you need to do this? Have you done that? And you get to the bottom, you've checked all of the different various things that you could be editing in the photo. So let's go over to Lightroom and just kind of browse through what that looks like. Okay, so we're in Lightroom. Let's find photo to open up. Let's find one that's maybe not as edited. There we go. So open up this one. Okay, so if we're going to edit this photo, all we've got to do is start here at the top and say light. Is there anything about the light we want to change? Do we want to play around with the exposure? Do we want to turn up the contrast? Do we want to lighten or darken the shadows at all? Do we want to play with the whites, with blacks, or any of that? Once we've done that, move down. Is there anything about the color we want to change? Do we want the temperature to be changed? Do we like where it is? Tint, etc. Go through the effects, details, optics, geometry, check. Okay, so now that we have all of those things done, we can come over to the side and ask ourselves, do we want to crop it? Is there anything you want to do as far as cropping the image? Then, or do we want to touch up the image at all? Oop, let's try that again. I don't know why that's not cooperating. Go back. Okay, there we go. Let's try that again. Okay. Then, do we want to do any of selective editing, things like that? Then when you're done, you can export it. So all of you have done that already. So that's workflow. Just what are the check boxes that you go through as you're editing a photo. Now, one of the great things you can do with Lightroom is create a preset. So a preset is basically a professional level filter. And the way that you do that in Lightroom is you do all the edits that you want to do for the photo. Then you come here to the little ellipses in the top corner and you click Create Preset. Now, it lets you decide what things you did to this photo that you want to repeat. So if we were to repeat the tools, that would also repeat any healing brush things that we've done, things like that. So you generally don't want those in a preset because those are specific to each photo, but you do want the light, the color, the effects, detail, optics, maybe even geometry depending on what you're doing to the photo. Then when you're done deciding all of that, you name the preset. And save it. So just click the check here. There we go. So the great thing is that saves you time with your workflow, because instead of having to go through and say I have another photo in this series that I want to do that exact same thing to, all I have to do is, instead of going through and doing each of these subsections, come over here. And it says use your presets. As you can see, I've made a couple different ones recently, and then we have the test preset that we just created. Okay, let's go back to here. So create presets to speed your workflow. Now, part of the important thing with developing a workflow, whether that's just this basic top to bottom editing, or if you decide to jump around a bit, is creating consistency. The reason creating consistency is important is because then you don't accidentally forget to do something, and you create a unified quality, a unified aesthetic in your work, because that's what clients are going to be looking for in you as a photographer. Can you consistently produce the same type of photos, the same, colors, textures, finishes, whatever it might be, and can you do that effectively and repeated, across many different projects? And so by developing this and showing that, on your portfolio, on your Instagram, clients will be able to see that you can do that. And it also just makes your work process much more efficient, because you know exactly what you're going to do when you go in and you open a photo. Okay, so now let's talk about file management. So on an iPad, it's not necessarily the most ideal place to organize your files, and I know all of you don't necessarily have access to a laptop, but a few things that are just kind of general rules of thumb when it comes to file organization is more organization is always better. And again, consistency. This is such a key thing to develop throughout your various processes, because it prevents you from making mistakes. If you have checklists that you've built for yourself, if you have a pattern that you've developed through habit, it makes it so that you produce consistent quality within your work. So let's walk through the process of the creation of a photo to final export for a client. So I'm going to erase this. So the very first thing, before you even start taking photos, you're going to want to format, let's spell it right, your memory card, whether that's an SD or a flash, depending on what your camera takes. And you don't necessarily have to do this before every single shoot, but you definitely want to do it every so many shoots, and probably every 2 or 3 shoots at the most. You definitely want to do it if you're switching your cards between cameras, because that's where you run into the most issues, is when you're trying to switch, even between different models in the same line of cameras, but definitely between different brands of cameras. So if you own a Nikon and a Canon, or you lend your card to a friend or borrow a friend's camera and they have a Sony and you have a Canon, you always want to format your card before you start shooting in a new camera. And even with models, especially if there's a lot of years between the models, say you have a model from 2008 and then a model from 2020, there's going to be a big difference in the way they might process things, and so you're going to want to format the card when you move it between those cameras. What that prevents is your card ended up being corrupted or writing files weird, and you losing all the hard work that you've put into a shoot. So the way you do that is you just go into the menu of your camera, and somewhere right there it should have the option to format card. Thing to understand though is that it will completely delete anything that is on the card, so make sure that you have backed up the card well before you do that. Okay, so we formatted our card, we go out, we do our shoot. Next, we're going to import our photos. Now, if you're using the iPad primarily, importing directly to Lightroom is generally your best bet for making sure that you get the full-sized, full-resolution RAW files. There are ways that you can organize the files when you import to Lightroom. We've got some various album and folder options, so kind of look through that and see what works for you. Next, when you export, you can actually name the files, or like number and sequence the files when you export. And the advantage of doing that is then you have a way to easily search the files. So, for example, if you decide to become a wedding photographer, you could maybe edit a batch of photos and say, the name of the couple is Sarah and Daniel or something like that. So you could say Sarah _ Daniel _1 JPEG. And you can set Lightroom so that it just changes this number, or if you're just doing a handful of photos, you can just go in and manually change them yourself. One step I forgot to add in here is you are going to curate or sort your photos. So obviously not every single photo you snap is going to be spectacular. So you're going to need to go through and figure out which ones you actually want to spend the time editing before you invest that time in doing that. Since I usually work on my computer when I'm doing this, on my laptop, I will make, let's start this over. I will make 3 different folders. So I will have, so we'll pretend this big box is our main folder. So So we'll say we're still working on Sarah and Daniel's wedding, so S&D wedding. Then within that folder, I will have unused images. And then I'll have another one that is to edit. And then I will have a third one that is edited. Now, I like to keep an extra copy of my photos in this to edited file folder here. And I'll just move a copy over into the edited. That way, if something goes wrong while I'm editing, I have a backup of the original file in the to edit folder. You never know what's going to happen. The last thing you want to do is, spend all day shooting a wedding and then accidentally delete something and not have a backup. Okay, so continuing in our process, we've imported, we've curated, we've edited and exported our photos. Whether that's, directly back into these files or, if you're working from Lightroom, then putting them into a folder like this. Now we need to make sure that we have good ways to share and back up our files. So first of all, backup. This is so important. I always try to back up my files as soon as I import them. So on my computer, I have all of my files synced with Dropbox. So the minute I upload a photo to my physical computer, it starts backing up on a cloud database through Dropbox. Now, Lightroom also has this capacity. If you sign up for a complete Adobe subscription, you can sync them and back it up. The free option I don't think allows you to do that, but if you're working professionally, you definitely want to invest in an option that will back up things for you. Because again, computers crash, technology gets stolen, things happen. The last thing you want to do is lose an entire shoot just because of a technical malfunction. So make sure you've created a lot of safe practices within your work to prevent this from happening. Some people just use a physical backup. That's fine as well. I prefer cloud versions, just because then I'm not worried about losing a physical hard drive or anything, but something is better than nothing. Another thing to consider as you're trying to decide how to back up your photos is making sure that as you're making copies, that you're copying them in such a way you're not losing the quality and resolution of your folder. So using a professional service such as Dropbox or even Google Drive will work better than just trying to store them on, some free services that are available, or especially you don't want to, just email them or, put them in a Facebook album or something like that. So then sharing. So you've shot this wedding, you need to share it. There's a couple different ways you can do that. So you can create an album on a professional hosting website. So use, and this is really good for printing. So usually these websites, you post all your photos into an album and then the client can decide if they want to download them. The way I usually just do it is, since I've already uploaded my files to Dropbox, I just send my clients the link to the Dropbox folder and have them download it. And because it's Dropbox, there's no loss in the resolution. One thing though is I don't send them all of these photos. All I send them is this. Because the last thing you want is for them to latch onto a photo that is in this folder here that's, maybe kind of funny but subpar in a lot of ways, and have them post it to their Instagram and tag you, because then other people look at it and be like, oh, that's a really crappy photo. That's the kind of photos this photographer takes. No, you want to make sure your clients only have their hands on the cream of the crop so that it presents you in the best way possible as a photographer. So that is kind of a basic overview of file management. It's kind of a crash course that I wanted to go over with you as you're wrapping up this semester. So as you continue to practice photography, whether that be as a hobby or potentially as a future career, These are just really good professional practices to avoid, the financial cost and the emotional cost that can happen from technical malfunctions. And the truth is, you can't avoid 100% of them. Sometimes things just break or get lost or malfunction in ways that are not expected, but if you are developing patterns within your work to A, prevent, and B, have a backup plan when things do go wrong, you will avoid 99% of the problems that you might face as a photographer.